Rome. The year is 390 BC, and Gallic warriors have just sacked the city, burning it to the ground. Rome, barely more than a handful of villages at the time, lies in ruins. Most cities would never come back from something like that, but over the next few centuries, the Romans turned their destroyed settlement into the largest city on Earth. More than 1 million people lived there. Marble temples rose 10 stories into the sky. Aqueducts carried fresh water across vast distances. Using modern AI tools, ancient Rome has been reconstructed at the height of its power, all based on historical records and archaeological findings. We are going to get up close and look at specific buildings, getting a real sense of what it felt like to actually be there. 70 million people, 3 continents, 1 empire, all governed from this single city. And at its center stood the Roman Forum, the seat of power for the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The Forum was home to dozens of temples and monuments, but a handful of places stand out as sites where some of Rome's most defining moments unfolded. One of them is the Curia, the Senate House, where 600 senators gathered to debate the laws of the empire. The building still stands today as one of the best preserved structures in the entire Forum. Out in the open plaza at its center stood the rostra, the speaker's platform. This is where Mark Antony delivered his famous funeral address following the assassination of Julius Caesar. We do not have his exact words, but ancient sources tell us he held up Caesar's blood-stained toga and read his will aloud to the crowd, revealing that Caesar had left money and gardens to every Roman citizen. The speech was so powerful that the crowd cremated Caesar's body right there in the Forum. On that very spot, the Romans later built the Temple of Julius Caesar, making him the first Roman in history to be declared a god. But perhaps the most sacred place in the entire Forum was a small circular structure known as the Temple of Vesta. Inside it, a flame burned without interruption for over 1,000 years, tended by the Vestal Virgins. Romans believed that if that flame ever went out, the empire itself would fall. These women served for 30 years and were required to remain virgins throughout their service. Breaking that vow meant being buried alive. Yet they also enjoyed privileges that no other Roman woman possessed. They could own property, pardon condemned prisoners, and were counted among the most influential figures in all of Rome. That tradition continued until Christianity brought it to an end in 394 AD. The Senate, the sacred flame, the speaker's platform, and we have barely begun to scratch the surface of what this place holds. This single plaza was the beating heart of the most powerful empire on Earth. But the emperors themselves lived just above it, up on Palatine Hill. The emperors transformed the entire hill into their own private palace complex. The Domus Augusti was the home of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. Compared to what came later, it was relatively modest. But this is where the imperial tradition began. Centuries later, Emperor Domitian decided to think on an entirely different scale. He built the Domus Flavia, a vast ceremonial palace where he hosted state banquets that could seat hundreds of guests, received foreign kings in throne rooms with ceilings 30 meters high, and put Rome's wealth and power on full display for anyone important enough to receive an invitation. Right beside it stood the Domus Augustana, his actual private residence. This was where the emperor and his family actually lived, with bedrooms, private baths, gardens, and courtyards that no guest ever set foot in. So the complex essentially had 2 palaces sitting side by side. One built for appearances, one built for life. And then there was this, a private stadium, 160 meters long, complete with seating reserved for the imperial family and their closest companions. The emperor could watch chariot races, athletic competitions, and gladiatorial combat without ever stepping outside. The Circus Maximus with seating for over 150,000 people, was literally just down the hill. But apparently that wasn't enough. He needed one of his own. And while the emperor watched races from his private backyard, the real action was unfolding down below. The Circus Maximus, the largest stadium in the ancient world. Over 150,000 Romans would pack inside to watch chariot racing, the most dangerous and consuming sport in the empire. Drivers reached speeds of up to 75 kilometers per hour, crashing into one another in collisions so violent they were compared to shipwrecks. Charioteers tied the reins around their waists, which meant that if they crashed, they'd be dragged along the ground until they died. But those who survived became extraordinarily wealthy. One famous driver earned enough over his career to feed the entire city of Rome for a year. And the fans were just as intense. Romans were divided into 4 racing factions: the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. And their loyalty ran so deep that riots would break out in the stands, sometimes leaving thousands dead. This wasn't just entertainment, it was obsession. But Rome's most famous surviving venue was the Colosseum. Far smaller, only 50,000 seats, yet it has stood for nearly 2,000 years, and the violence inside was far worse. Because here, violence wasn't an accident. It was the entire point. Over 300 years, an estimated 400,000 people died inside this arena. Gladiators, criminals, prisoners, and slaves. Hundreds of thousands of animals were slaughtered as well. Lions from Africa, bears from Germany, elephants from Egypt, hunted to the edge of extinction simply to fill the demand for Roman spectacle. A typical day began with executions at dawn, followed by animal hunts at midday, and then gladiatorial combat in the afternoon. But what made all of this possible was hidden beneath the arena floor, a 2-story labyrinth where slaves operated 28 elevators, sending animals and fighters up through trapdoors into the arena above. From where the crowd sat, a lion would appear seemingly out of nowhere, as if by magic. Romans never saw the machinery. They only saw the spectacle. During the opening games alone, which lasted 100 days, 5,000 animals were killed, and this went on for centuries. So that was Roman entertainment. Blood, speed, and spectacle, unlike anything the world had ever seen. And when Romans weren't watching people die, they were deeply religious, building magnificent temples throughout the city. Most temples were dedicated to a single god, but the Pantheon was different. It's worth noting that some details in any reconstruction involve educated guesses, since the bronze fittings and decorative elements were stripped away long ago. This temple was built to honor all the gods at once, which is exactly what the word Pantheon means: all gods. It was Emperor Hadrian's way of covering every possibility. The Pantheon is the best preserved building from ancient Rome, and for good reason. It is an engineering masterpiece. Its concrete dome spans 43 meters across, with no internal supports whatsoever, lit only by a single circular opening at the top known as the oculus. Today, you can walk inside and stand beneath that same dome that Romans stood under 1,900 years ago. This design shaped architecture for 2,000 years, from Brunelleschi's dome in Florence to the United States Capitol. It became a church in 609 AD, which is the only reason it was never torn down or stripped for building materials like most Roman temples. The Pantheon was remarkable, but it wasn't Rome's most sacred structure. That distinction belonged to the temple of Jupiter, king of the gods, standing at the top of Palatine Hill, one of Rome's 7 hills, rising directly above the Forum. Built in 509 BC, the Temple of Jupiter was among Rome's oldest and grandest temples, dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the 3 most important gods. This was where triumphal processions came to an end. After conquering new lands, generals would march up Palatine Hill with prisoners, treasures, and their victorious armies to offer sacrifices to Jupiter. For over 800 years, this temple served as the spiritual heart of the empire, visible from across the entire city. But unlike the Pantheon, it did not survive. Fires destroyed it several times over, and today almost nothing remains. Temples and gods gave Rome its spiritual power, but the empire was truly built on military strength. Breaking centuries of Roman tradition that had forbidden troops inside the city, emperors stationed the Praetorian Guard at the Castra Praetoria, turning their own bodyguards into their greatest threat. The Praetorian Guard was Rome's most prestigious military unit, around 10,000 soldiers at its peak, serving as the emperor's personal protection and paid 3 times more than ordinary troops. Unlike other Roman legions posted along the empire's distant borders, the Praetorians lived right here in Rome, inside the Castra Praetoria, a massive military fortress built just outside the city in 23 AD. This was highly unusual. Roman law had traditionally forbidden armies within the city limits, but emperors needed protection, and the Praetorian Guard provided it. Though at the same time, they also assassinated at least 13 emperors, overthrew dynasties, and once auctioned off the imperial throne to the highest bidder. The Castra Praetoria had thick, fortified walls, not to keep out foreign enemies, but to house the most politically dangerous force in all of Rome. How would you spot a Praetorian in a crowd? The Praetorian you're looking at wears ceremonial armor for palace guard duty. That red horsehair crest running side to side across the helmet, rather than front to back like regular soldiers, immediately marked him as elite. The silver scale armor and shoulder plates showed superior craftsmanship, and the red oval shield decorated with the scorpion, stars, and moons was the Praetorian symbol. The ceremonial spear and decorated bronze belt with its ornate sword scabbard all identified him as part of the emperor's personal guard. In reality, though, their appearance varied greatly. On campaign, they wore standard legionary equipment. Patrolling Rome, they often dressed in civilian clothes, and at state functions they appeared in this elaborate ceremonial version. Everything depended on the context. While emperors kept a watchful eye on their bodyguards, ordinary Romans depended on something far more essential: the aqueducts. Take the massive Aqua Claudia, one of Rome's 11 major aqueducts. It stretched 69 kilometers from mountain springs in the Anio Valley all the way to Rome. And this is what it looked like as it entered the city. Enormous stone arches rising 27 meters high, roughly as tall as a 9-story building, carrying water along a stone channel running across the top. Romans passing under these arches each day could glance up and witness one of the most remarkable feats of engineering the ancient world ever produced. Fresh water flowing silently overhead, delivered with effortless precision, engineering at its absolute peak. The aqueduct alone brought enough clean water to sustain hundreds of thousands of people living in Rome every single day, all of it driven by nothing more than gravity and careful calculation. Extraordinary. And what makes it even more striking is that portions of it still stand today, nearly 2,000 years on. But Rome was far more than its grand structures. It was a living, breathing city of over 1 million people. So where did all those people actually sleep at night? Imagine this. You are an ordinary Roman, perhaps a shopkeeper or a tradesman. You wake up in an insula, a tall apartment block packed tightly with families just like yours. Around 90% of Romans called these buildings home. They rose 5 or 6 stories into the sky, thrown up quickly using wood and brick, with families crammed into single rooms amid constant noise and chaos. The higher your floor, the lower your rent, but also no running water, no place to cook, and if a fire started below you, your only way out was down a narrow staircase through smoke and flames. These buildings collapsed often enough that emperors eventually stepped in and passed laws capping how high they could be built. Each morning, you would leave your tight quarters and make your way somewhere like Trajan's market to get your day going. Carved into the slope of a hillside, this enormous complex contained over 150 shops and offices spread across several floors. Down on the ground level, you would find small storefronts selling just about everything imaginable. Spices brought in from the east, fresh fish from the coast, wine, olive oil, cloth, pottery. Climb the stairs and you would reach larger storage spaces and administrative offices where the real machinery of the empire quietly turned. Romans worked here, struck deals here, kept commerce moving here. The beating economic heart of an empire, all housed under one roof. After a long and exhausting day, there was one destination every Roman looked forward to: the public baths. The baths of Trajan stretched across over 11 hectares and could accommodate thousands of visitors at the same time. Going to the baths in Rome was not a quick errand. You would spend hours there. You would work out in the exercise yard, swim in the pools, sweat through the hot rooms, then brace yourself with a cold plunge. Along the way, you would run into friends, trade rumors about politics, seal business arrangements, and maybe eat something. The entry fee was barely anything, just a small coin. So absolutely everyone showed up. Slaves, merchants, even senators. All those aqueducts carrying water across the landscape, their flow could end up right here, warming these vast halls, filling the pools, giving everyday Romans a standard of living that Europe would not see again for over 1,000 years. 1 million people, one city. Rome was the first place on earth to pull that off, and to make it function, they essentially invented the modern city from scratch. They built the insulae, 5- and 6-story apartment blocks housing 90% of the population, the world's first high-rises. They built the Aqua Claudia, 69 kilometers of stone arches carrying mountain water all the way to the city. 190,000 cubic meters of it every single day. They built Trajan's market, 150 shops stacked across multiple levels, the ancient world's version of a shopping complex. They built the Colosseum and the Circus Maximus, venues that together could hold over 200,000 spectators. They built the baths of Trajan, 11 hectares where everyone from slaves to senators came to wash. And they built all of it to last. The Pantheon's concrete dome has endured for 1,900 years and still holds the record as the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever constructed. Rome didn't simply build a city, they solved a problem no one else could crack. How do you make 1 million people living in a single city actually function together? Jump forward 2,000 years. New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai. Apartment buildings follow the same basic idea as ancient Roman insulae. Sports stadiums echo the layout of the Colosseum, just on a larger scale. Public gathering spaces mirror Roman forums and bathhouses, only updated for modern times. And concrete is still built on the same chemical principles they figured out back then. The technology is advanced, but the foundation underneath it all still traces back to Rome. They were the first to solve it. Ever since, we've simply been continuing to build on the blueprint they left behind.